Good morning, everybody, and happy Cinco de Mayo. Before we get started, I just want to thank everybody, all of the viewers of Joe Daddy's Garage, all of your comments, all of your ideas, things that I never would have thought about. I've been able to now incorporate into the car, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. But again, Barry, thank you for putting this forum together. I think it's a great way to share ideas and share experiences, something that we can really use in the future. So today is the first day that I've hung all of the panels back onto this vehicle. The reason I'm doing this is because a lot of the issues I've had in the front end, as in the back end, I've had to do some replacing. And when you start replacing old parts with new parts and then trying to merge back in some of the old parts, you don't have those reference marks that the original manufacturers had, right? So it's not like I can put a panel on, put a couple of alignment tools in, and the panel fits. Everything has to be massaged, everything has to be worked. So I'm going to take you around the front end and show you some of those challenges. But before we get started, just a few things I've done to date. So the rear end has been pulled out, rebuilt, new bearings, new seals, new brakes, new brake lines, emergency brake cables, new brake shoes, everything. Replaced the slave cylinders on the back. They were rusted right out. So again, replaced the slave cylinders. Rear end's all back in, so everything's done there. On the front end, upper and lower control arms, new bushings everywhere, all new steering linkage, so inner and outer tie rods, pitments, everything's been done on the front end as well. Rebuilt the steering box. Steering boxes are interesting, I got to tell you that. But basically, here's the thing. They're not going to be the same all the way through full range of motion. There's going to be spots within it where you're going to get a nice tight fit and then it gets loose on the ends. For this vehicle, the best thing you can hope for is that when you're going in a straight line, you have zero play in the steering box. But once you start making lefts and rights, there will get some slack in the steering box. You can't avoid it. So you can't tighten the outside without then binding the inside. So you want to make sure you do that as well. But let's take a walk around the car and let's show you what I've done. So here we are at the back of the car again. Now, if you watched the previous video, we spent a lot of time back here, and the reason is everything was rotted out. In fact, pretty well cut the back end of the car off at the rear, so everything's new. New frame rails, new trunk panels, obviously new quarter panels. Challenge obviously in the extensions. We took care of that, as we saw with Barry on the Jade project, by cutting out the spot welds that hold the fender to the inner fender. We're able to then massage the fender out and round it out, so now we have a nice clean fit here. Put the bumper on. Again, this is all about fitment, just making sure everything's okay. Bumper fits really well now. Obviously when you have the whole back end of the car off and you take measurements and you put it all back together, the concern is did you make it too wide? Did you make it too narrow? And the only way you're really going to tell that again is by putting all the pieces on and seeing how they fit and being able to make adjustments as you go. And that's, again, the front end. We'll talk about that. Some of the things that you have that are limiting you is this trunk has to be flush here. So that means this trunk has very limited motion, right? It can only move back a little bit, forward or back. So in order to make sure this fits, all of this had to be right. So again, challenge is there. So the issue, of course, is that as Barry showed us, all of these remanufactured parts are pinched but not welded, so they move. Now, I don't know if that's by design so that you can adjust them, or if that's just because they don't care. But basically, you have to make sure that the panels are level, and then you can adjust the trunk any way you want. And then once you get that level, then obviously we're going to have to weld this in. But as far as the rear end, I'm done. Like I said, quarter panels are all welded in, inner and outer fenders are welded in, or the wheelhouses. Everything else fits really well. I do have that little bit of a complaint that I have in the back fitment, but I'm going to ignore that, and let's move on. So on our way to the front end, let's make a pit stop on the interior. So obviously re-welded a lot of the floors in here. I replaced the rear floors, that was rusted out, pinholes, right? So instead of fixing the pinholes, I just simply cut them out and replace them. Now you will notice that I put down some kill mat, right? So this is a tar-based adhesive with an aluminized covering. Now why did I do this? Well, number one, it's all about vibration noise, right? So this will actually cut down on vibrations and noises and road noise. Now it is a convertible, I'm going to get road noise, but for your application, maybe not. So Good news is that by placing this in, I'm going to do a couple of things. Road noise, I'm going to cut down on the heat, right? So this is going to reflect the heat back into the engine bay, so we're going to keep the heat out of the cab. But lastly, and most importantly, is that this is now a barrier. So if I get water in this car, and it's a convertible, I will get water in this car, what'll happen is it'll pool on top of this material. It won't actually make contact with my metal. Now the metal's treated, it's protected, but metal, water on metal just never works regardless. So now I've got a protective barrier. Now the good news, Amazon. I've been doing all of my shopping through Amazon. You can't go out anymore. Kill mat, 50 mil, 50 square feet, come in a box, these little panels like this, $90 Canadian delivered. And the car takes 40 square feet. So this panel goes all the way up. I've got it right up into the top of the cowl and runs all the way to the back. And that leaves me 10 square feet. So I'm going to put this on the inside of panels. Again, vibration, right? These cars, you know, they weren't like today's cars where they're very quiet. You know, the things buzz and rattle. So I'm going to put this anywhere I can to stop the buzz and rattle. So hopefully that'll do it. You can see the pedals are in. I'll talk about those in a few minutes. And the other thing that you'll see a little bit more clearly when I'm talking about the pedals, I've also put some speaker pods in. I wanted to be able to put speakers in the kick panels. I cut the fenders, the insides, right, obviously. And I now have pretty well stainless steel bowls really attached to the outside. And that allows the speaker now to go through the kick panel, give me a nice flush mount. But from an interior perspective, that's really all I've done. I won't be touching the interior for a long time. So let's take a look at first thing, pedal fitment. When you're converting a car from a manual brake to a power brake system, the disc brake bar, that pedal that I get from the distributors, is about 4 inches longer than the original pedal, which means it doesn't actually pivot on the same clutch pivot anymore. It has to be moved. So this, of course, is under the dash. And you can see the original bracket here, which is what held the original brake pedal. Now, as I mentioned before, the original brake pedal used to pivot on the same shaft as the clutch pedal. But these new pedals are longer, so you have to move the pivot up and away. Now, in the manual, it talks about there's a pre-marked stamping on this piece to allow you to guide where that goes. In my case, there was not. So I did what everybody else does. I took a wild-ass guess. And of course, I was wrong. Basically, what happens is you move this pivot point up, and the distance you have of that pivot point to the firewall and away from the firewall drastically affects the pedal position, because as you move the pivot point, the fulcrum point, which of course is where the brake rod is, makes that bottom pedal either swing away from the firewall or swing towards the firewall. So I had to actually re-drill this a second time, because when I first assembled it, my pedal was about a foot away from the floorboards, which is useless. So I had to move this pivot point back, and then that allowed me to bring it back over here. So that's the key thing. So now on the side of the clutch, the good news is that the clutch pedal mounts where the original brake pedal used to pivot. So what I've done is I removed the bushings and I replaced them with bearings, because my 68 S code, the challenge is that with those bushings, they burn out and the pedal shifts and it's very difficult to push in. So the bearings will make the clutch pedal a lot easier to move. But secondly, this spring up here is actually a helper spring. It's not a return spring. Once the system's assembled, I'm going to take this spring and lock it onto the front of the clutch pedal. This will help engage the clutch by pulling on the top of the pedal, so it'll actually make the clutch pedal a lot easier to use. And finally, the emergency brake. So all of the cables are connected all the way through to the back. There's a spring that is on the pivot point underneath where the cables gather and that connects to. And that spring, what it does is that when you engage the parking brake, that spring allows you just to simply push this down and it returns the handle all the way back to normal. You don't have to push it back in. And this is something, again, back in my old car, and this was terrible. I mean, that hardly worked and this was broken, but the good news is it's working properly now. So here we're at the front of the car. Obviously the challenge is always going to be when you have old parts or original parts and you're trying to match them with maybe, you know, maybe OEM, maybe not, because this is not an original fender, because this was hit. Again, I can tell right away that the front extension was hit because it's broken down here. I had to drill or had to grind this out to clean this all up. This was hit. As you can see, it's folded down. This has been crushed. In fact, when it got hit, it pushed the hood back and it crushed my cowl. The Bondo was still there. The sandblaster didn't clean it out. I guess either they didn't see it or they didn't concentrate on it. But I've got a crushed cowl, so that's going to be a challenge to fix. This hood has been stepped on. Somebody was stepping on this hood, and the way I could tell is that this front line is flat here now. This isn't round like it should be. And up at the front, it didn't meet the cowl. And what I ended up doing, and I know this doesn't sound very mechanically inclined, I took a couple of 4x4s, put them on the ground. I took my hood, flipped it upside down onto it, ran the 4x4s down the front here, and then I stepped on that, and then I pushed that down. Not exactly something that I would do again, but you know what? I was frustrated. You know, the hood wasn't fitting. I just couldn't get it to work. So I stepped on my hood. But basically the good news is now I noticed the pinch points are back the way they should have been because it uncovered the original paint. So if it was paint under there, that means it was originally exposed. And if it was originally exposed, that means whoever stepped on the hood buried that paint. So it's back to normal. So I guess that's a good thing. But it's all about initial fitting, like I said. So now the fenders are on, the headlight extensions, you know, they're just loose, but you know, they fit nice. I had to drill out the spot welds in order to massage the fender because I really want this to fit nice. Bumpers on, which means now my clearances are here on this side and on that side. So again, making sure that the fenders are in and out, because the problem is you move the fenders, you move the hood, you move the grill, everything moves. It's very difficult to make sure that everything's in the exact right spot. Again, as I mentioned, we don't have those index points that the original manufacturers had where they would just drop a point through and then of course they knew the piece was aligned. It doesn't work anymore, not with repop parts. That just doesn't do it. But basically, I just wanted to put the whole front end together. I refurbished my original grill. A lot of bent aluminum in here. I straightened out all of the grid, cleaned it all up. Took out all the original bracing, cleaned all that up, pop riveted the whole front end, added, of course, my fog lights. I wanted the fog lights back on this car. But basically now everything seems to be fitting quite well up in the front. So, you know, we're on to the next stage. So let's take a look underneath the hood. So, open up the hood. A couple of things under here. A little bit of damage, as I mentioned, because somebody was stepping on it. Some of the grill or some of the support bracing back here was bent. I've tried to straighten that out as best I can. Same thing up on the front. All of this was all bent out of shape, so I've been trying to rework that. This was rotten. There's a couple of pictures there for you, but the basically is that everything is rotten. So it's an original hood. So the good news is the original hood is allowing me then to index everything else off of it. So I'm hoping that that is, you know, something I can use, but we'll have to see on that one. But now that the hood's in place, and like I said, the hinges are working well. Here's a short video what I had to do to the hinges. So simply using my vise, on the back of my vise I got a hammer spot. So we take the pin that is loose, we place the pin so that the pin is sitting on the hammer spot. I'm just using a paint can to hold the back of it. But now that that is sitting on a solid surface, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to take a ball peen hammer, which allows me to place it inside on top of that mushroom. And then I take a little bit of a larger persuader, and we give her a shot. And we got a little bit of play left, but not too much. So we're just going to do that a few more times. I'm going to do it on both sides, and that'll take care of the play on the inside. And then I'll just check up on the top. I have no play up in here, so that's good. On the other side I did. I had to strike these up here as well in order to get the whole thing solid. But I'm going to give this a few more shots and I'll put it back in the car. Wasn't that fun? But let's take a look now at that Z-bar under here, and also now the whole new power brake assembly that I've had to add to this car. So first off, this is why they call it a Z-bar. You can see that the bar comes across the top of the steering box, runs down, and then pops back out over here. So you got this motion with the Z-bar that allows you then to
press on the clutch pedal and also then to engage the clutch. Just put this little temporary bracket here, really just to kind of hold the pivot point. This is where there's a pivot on the engine block itself. So the Z-bar actually is trapped between the engine block and the frame rail. So you can see actually the leverage that is on this pedal is quite a bit. So that pedal right now, as I push forward on the Z-bar, that clutch pedal is now up past the brake pedal actually, about 1.5 inches. And then when you press on the clutch all the way to the floor, it actually moves this Z-bar only a few inches up here. And it's even less at the bottom. You can see the bottom swing is only maybe, what, 2 inches? But I guess the idea is that when you press on the clutch, that pushes the clutch rod. The clutch rod then pushes towards the clutch fork. The clutch fork actually then pivots, pushes against the throwout bearing, and then obviously engages the clutch. And I guess it's going to be a lot of tuning to get that to work properly. And of course, finally, we're looking at the new power brake assembly. This was a manual brake car. So I had a couple of challenges. First off, getting the brake booster through the firewall and attaching properly to that brake pedal required that I made the hole a little bit bigger in the firewall for the booster assembly, because originally it was just the master cylinder bolted up against the firewall. So now, in order to make the hole bigger, obviously I had to use a hole saw, so I made that bigger. I was able to assemble or install the booster. Had to make an adjustment because I want that brake rod to be square into the brake pedal, and the reason is first off, you don't want that wearing out, but secondly, it all has to do with your brake light switch, right? You have to make sure that's square. So make sure your brake booster is square against the firewall, and then once that's in place, then of course I installed the master cylinder. Master cylinder has a proportioning valve on it, but remember, this car was originally a non-power car. So as Barry had mentioned, and I didn't heed his warning, is that ordering the brake lines for this car, if you're not using the original setup, is a waste. The brake lines just don't work properly. The fittings aren't correct because I'm using modern brake parts with the original style brake lines, so that doesn't work. The routing of the lines I don't like either. As Barry showed on his car as well, he had to use blocks to connect the lines together. It doesn't work. So make your own lines. It takes a little bit of time. Get yourself a bender, get yourself a flaring tool, practice a few times, but you'll be able to make them yourself. And that way there you can route them anywhere you want.
So that's going to be it for a while, everybody. I wanted to put the car together just to make sure that I had the appropriate parts, that they did fit. So now I know they fit. It's going to be nothing but tedious massaging. Bodywork, I have my Rage Ultra. Thank you, Barry, for that. I'm going to be using that, obviously, to try to flatten this out over the next few months. Probably be a long time before I do another update, because really it's all going to be nothing but, moving panels and putting on bond or putting on filler and taking the filler back off, and a lot of work like that. So months will go by and the progress will probably look about the same. But as I said before, thank you everyone for all of your support and all of your help. And just as a notice here, I've got a Samsung Galaxy S6 zip tied to a pole here, and that's what I'm using for my camera. It's on portrait mode. That way there you get a bit of a wide angle shot. So I want to see what you guys are doing. Please send in your videos. This has been a great experience for me, sharing and talking about some of the challenges I've had, because I got a lot of feedback, and that feedback was fantastic. So once again, thank Joe Daddy's Garage for setting this up. What a great community, great lovers of these cars. And what we're looking for in 2021, Barry, is that we're going to have some sort of a get-together in your neighborhood, bring these cars in and show you what we've done, and maybe we can get your stamp of approval. But until then, everybody, have a fantastic summer and take care of yourselves. Thank you so much.